Here's the thought: breaking things doesn't make them interesting, it just makes them broken. It's that time of year again where people decide to defend a failing story by arguing that it's actually good, that it deconstructs something that everybody likes. This has been a trend in popular media for a while. I think it dates back to the 80s with works like Watchmen. That's the oldest example of deconstruction of popular media I can think of, but I'm sure there are others. So what do I mean by deconstruction? As a literary theory and tool, deconstruction is the taking apart of ideas, concepts, tropes, and archetypes to point out contradictions, flaws, and inconsistencies, and to examine the difference of how those things play out in a given story compared to other stories or to the real world. With Watchmen, it was a deconstruction of superheroes, whether they should be trusted, how people in their position would actually behave, how the world would actually react, and what would it mean to have someone with cosmic powers around when the world is on the brink of nuclear war. This kind of analysis is perfectly fine. The problem is that deconstruction has shifted so that it's no longer about analyzing the flaws in something, but simply tearing something down. The point now is to find something that people like and eviscerate it. Take every positive element of that thing and twist it into being bad. If there's no logical way for that to happen, no way for something to be perceived as evil or wrong, then the concept or the characters will be changed to make that happen, even if that results in someone acting completely out of character. The end goal is to make the character, concept, story, or franchise unlikable, inside and out. This is especially true if the stories appeal to certain groups, mostly straight, white, and male. If the story appeals to all three, oh, it's definitely getting torn down. The most recent example of this is The Acolyte. The point of the show is to deconstruct the Jedi, but not to analyze the Order or point out its flaws. No, it's to tear down the Jedi, to make them the villains of the show, and of Star Wars as a whole. There is no deep analysis of what happens to a kid when they leave their family to join the Jedi Order, and the Jedi try to get the kid to suppress their feelings. There's no analysis of the limitations of the methods the Jedi use to access the Force. There's no analysis of the difficulty the Jedi experience having to constantly keep their emotions in check. None of that is present in the show because that's not the intent. The intent, the point, is to claim that these things happen without showing evidence of them, and that they're bad, and as a result, so are the Jedi. Not flawed, but bad, evil, irredeemable. So, surprise, that hasn't gone over well with Star Wars fans, and that's made some people mad. They are so mad. Why? Because that's not the response you're supposed to have. You're supposed to go along with it. It's interesting watching how people defend The Acolyte. Most of the defenders argue that it's different, as if this means something. Just because something is different doesn't mean it's good. Comic Book Resources put out an article making this case, and it's a perfect example of the problems with this argument. In the article, the writer Jamie Parker says, quote, "The Acolyte is almost over, and fans have begun to see that it isn't a typical Star Wars story. The Acolyte has been offering some unique and fresh views of the galaxy far, far away." No, it hasn't. The expanded universe stories touched on these topics many times. The witches from Brendok are basically third-rate versions of the witches of Dathomir. The idea that the Jedi are flawed, arrogant, misguided, and blind to reality has been covered in books set around the time of the prequels all the way back to the Old Republic. The Acolyte isn't fresh or unique. It's a retread of old ideas that the showrunner Leslie Headland probably didn't know about because she didn't read the books. That's a recurring theme when people deconstruct stories. They're usually ignorant of what's already been done. Back to the article, quote, "The Jedi have always been the center of Star Wars and the heroes of the universe. They have done some questionable things, like taking children for training, but these actions have always been ignored or glossed over. For better or worse, the Acolyte is shining a light on the dark side of the Jedi, which matches up with the themes of another controversial Star Wars film. While the Acolyte isn't perfect, it does allow the fans to see the galaxy through a different lens for one of the few times in the saga." Again, this is nothing new if you followed anything from the expanded universe, but there is one major difference between the EU stories and the Disney stories: deconstruction. The point of the EU stories was to tell the history that everyone wanted to know. The point of the Disney stories is to deconstruct what everyone loves about Star Wars. Surprise, most fans won't like you doing that. People have pointed out flaws within the Jedi Order for years, but the current attitude is to treat the Jedi as if they're villains, and it seems like it's for no other reason than that people, specifically men and boys, like the Jedi. It's not coming from a place of analysis. It's just spite. For example, The article talks about how fans reacted to the deconstruction/destruction of Luke Skywalker in Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi. Quote, "In the original trilogy, Luke was a character full of hope and belief that the galaxy had more to offer its people than evil and tyranny. Yet after fighting against the dark side his whole life, only to see his nephew fall to it, left Luke a broken hero who had lost his faith in the Force and the galaxy." No, that's not what happened. What happened is that Luke had a vision that his nephew would turn to the dark side, so he got up in the middle of the night and tried to kill his nephew while the boy slept over something that might happen. The reason this pissed off fans is because Luke saw enough good in his mass murderer father that he was willing to put saving the galaxy at stake just to bring Vader back to the light side of the Force. Let me repeat that. Luke Skywalker thought his mass murderer father could be redeemed, but then 20 years later tried to kill his nephew because the boy might turn to the dark side. That doesn't make a lick of sense. Not one bit. And that's why fans were pissed. The idea that you take someone who was hopeful for the future, who had redeemed a tyrant, and then turn him into a bitter old man who tried to kill a kid over a vision isn't brilliant storytelling. It isn't subverted expectations. It's a sign that all you want to do is tear down what other people like. What makes it worse is that no one bothered to reconstruct anything in its place. That's what deconstruction looks like when it has no genuine motivation. Watchmen is an example of deconstruction of superheroes, but with a purpose. The point is to show that these are just people, and like people, they're flawed. Their goals aren't always altruistic, and some of them do the right thing for the wrong reasons. The way Alan Moore shows this is by getting the audience invested in the characters, showing their complexities and flaws, and then offering something of a reconstruction of what the heroes at least ought to be after the climax of the story. Not that any of these people would actually become that. But there is no reconstruction in The Last Jedi. The whole point is to tear down Luke Skywalker, not build him up, and to leave the audience with Rey, a character with no purpose, no motivation, no hint of heroism, altruism, or even a basic desire to see the bad situation change. She's just there to be there, and now she's the best because she's the only one left and because she's female. That's it. That's what The Last Jedi has to offer. Forget the past. Kill it if you have to. I wonder why fans didn't like it. So then we get to the Acolyte, and we get the same thing. Quote, "The witches of Brindok want nothing to do with the Jedi and do not want them to take their daughters to be trained. Yet the Jedi feel entitled to May and Osha's abilities. This is only a small glimpse of the hubris of the Jedi. The Order believed that they were the only ones capable of training someone in the Force. But that's not what happens in the show. The Space Witches abscond to planet Lebeau for reasons, probably because they're using the dark side, create twins using the Force, and then try to hide what they've done from the Jedi. When the Jedi show up, they want to test the twins, but they don't take them. The witches tell the twins to lie and fail the test. May obeys. The Jedi know she's lying, but they don't take her. Osha tries to lie but can't go through with it. The Jedi ask if she wants to become one of them, and Osha says yes. Even then, they don't just take Osha. At no point do the Jedi even try to force their ways on the Space Witches outside of invoking their Republic right to test Force-sensitive kids. They aren't kidnapping kids in the show. I've made this point in every review. If you want to claim that the Jedi are doing bad things, you have to show them doing it. You can't just claim that the Jedi are bad and then expect everyone to go along with it. The same goes for this idea that Osha was kicked out of the Jedi Order, which the article claims, but that's not what Osha says. She says that she chose to leave the Order. Indara did recommend that Osha's training stop, but that's one master, not all of them. The issue came down to Osha's feelings and how they affected her training. And here's the thing. It's well established that a person's emotions can lead them to accessing the dark side of the Force. We're missing information. We don't know how emotional Osha was at the time, or how much of a risk she was at leaning into the dark side. To just assume that the Jedi's reasons were wrong without that info is bad storytelling. Like claiming, quote, "The Jedi are essentially throwing away anyone who they consider not good enough. They have ripped these children away from their families. They know nothing in life except the Order, and then that is ripped away from them as well. This not only would leave people hurt and broken, but also even more likely to be susceptible to the dark side." Maybe that's the reason why the Jedi refuse to train older kids. Those kids will remember their families, and those broken bonds will make them more susceptible to the dark side. But again, the Jedi didn't throw Osha away. She left the Order. That's what's in the show. That's what everyone in the show outside of Tagalong says. Osha chose to leave, not that she was forced out, not that she was thrown away. The character you're looking for is called Ahsoka. She was kicked out of the Order based on a lie, and all the Jedi but Anakin abandoned her. The kicker in all this is that George Lucas already set up that the Jedi had become complacent, overconfident, and overpowered, and this is what led to their downfall. Part of it was that the Force was literally trying to balance itself, and with there being so many Jedi and so few dark side users, someone like Palpatine was bound to arise. Part of it was also that the Jedi had become so fixed in their ways that they wouldn't at least bend the rules a little to accommodate people like Anakin, someone who needed far more guidance than he got. Had he been trained by Qui-Gon, Anakin probably would have never fallen. Had the Jedi Council taken more care with him and not openly distrusted him, Anakin probably wouldn't have been so susceptible to Palpatine. Hell, had the Jedi exercised basic concern and questioned why this random senator is so interested in this boy, Anakin probably would have been saved. Lucas did all this without making the Jedi into the bad guys. They were flawed, but still good. But that's not the purpose of the current modern deconstruction. It's not to show that the Jedi made mistakes, but to claim that the Jedi are themselves a mistake, that they shouldn't exist, and that anyone who is a Jedi is nothing more than an emotionless, child-stealing monster. Again, I wonder why Star Wars fans don't like this. If all you want to do is take what someone else likes and tear it down, you can't expect those people to go along with it. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.